As you may know, I love boxes. Previously on this channel, I've made a vampire slaying box as well as a faux antique jewelry box. And in general, I've also just collected quite a few over the past year. When I was rereading one of my favorite book series, the Six of Crows duology, I came across this excerpt. Oh man, I lost the page. The box was built like a small cabinet, its double doors fastened with an elaborate gold clasp. There were capsules of dye, pots of colored powder, and rows of glass cases filled with what looked like clear gels. Needless to say, I needed this box. The problem is, same as before, I can't really justify buying one or even making one because there's just no space in my room where it wouldn't become a tripping hazard. And so, much like my vampire box, we're going to have to go small. Hi, my name is Emily and I'm an amateur miniature artist. The type of apothecary kit I wanted to make was, as described in the book, this standing one with 2 doors. And to make sure the image was always at hand, I decided to sketch it out. I modified it very slightly to have fewer drawers because, by god, I cannot fathom making drawers that tiny, and made some notes of what hardware I might need as well as little feet. Once again, I whipped out my stash of leftover basswood, which I previously misidentified as sandalwood, oops. And to save some measuring time, I thought I'd try using popsicle sticks for these shelves. These popsicle sticks aren't perfect. You can see it's kind of warped and uneven, but I think that just adds to the faux antique aesthetic. And so, using the popsicle sticks as a baseline, I began cutting out the pieces. Here is a semi-preview of the side panel. Honestly, this was a lot more work than I thought it was going to be. This popsicle stick is surprisingly hard and my wrists are in pain now. So I'm going to try using the basswood because I know I've been able to cut it with scissors in the past. It will take a lot more measuring, but it would be easier on my hands. Alas, this did not really work out because using the scissors on the basswood only caused it to split. And so I was back to using the X-Acto knife again. Can you see the vision? Can you guys even see what I'm doing from this angle? Now I just need to cut out the backing pieces. For the little dividers, I'm going to use the rounded edges of the popsicle sticks that we cut off. But after this, we just have to make the little drawers, and then we're done the wood cutting. Before I make the itty bitty drawers though, I'm going to sand everything down and then assemble the main body so the measurements can be as accurate as possible. Here you can see my very methodical sanding process. Much like ironing, sanding is not an activity I particularly enjoy. The work is coarse and rough and irritating, and the sawdust gets everywhere. And yet, while I don't like doing it, I do like the end result, so I just have to grumble my way through it. Plus, if I don't do it, I always end up regretting it, and it takes much more work to fix it after the fact. And now let's get assembling. Unfortunately, I realized I miscalculated the size of the side panels. I always forget to account for the depth of the wood itself. So now I guess I have to trim all of these side pieces, and also that pile over there. When I was working in retail, my manager told me that the way I hold a box cutter gave her anxiety. I mean, I don't know what she was talking about. I'm taking a break for now. I made so many mistakes with measuring these side pieces, and now my fingers are hurting from pinching all the pieces down while I cut them. So I got one side trimmed. The other side will require me to cut out some new pieces, and I'll do that later after my fingers stop hurting. At this point, my only solace was that the main body of the cabinet looked pretty dang good. I particularly liked my decision to use the rounded bits of the popsicles for the dividers. Something about it just looks so pleasing. Except that when I came back from my break, I realized the top shelf had started to droop. Don't worry, I glued it back later. I'm going to let everything dry, and tomorrow we're going on an adventure. I'm back from my excursion. Let me show you what I got. So the place I went to was called Ross's Treasure House, and the place was absolutely packed with a bunch of miniature stuff, and I would love to go back there one day because the owner was so nice. Anyway, I got this little cast iron pot unrelated to the project. I got this for somebody else. I got this golden scale because in some pictures that I searched up of the apothecary cabinet, there are sometimes scales beside it. This does not fit in my box, but I think it would be a nice set dressing. Next, this is the reason I went all the way to the store. Tiny little bell handles. Look how itty bitty it is. I got some other general door handles. These seem to be more in the correct size for my box. I also got this little copper pot that might be a little too big for my box. I'll compare it later. I got some general glass jars. Apparently, in the time when apothecary kits were a thing, glass was the best way to carry around liquid stuff. Obviously, they wouldn't use cork, but I just like the aesthetic better. And then I got these fancy little crystal knobs. I wanted to get normal knobs for the drawers, but then I saw these and I'm like, I kind of have to get them. And lastly, this one is very exciting. It's a teeny little oil lamp. This one, unlike the other ones, was not manufactured. This one was actually handmade by the owner herself, and it's just so adorable and intricate. I think she said it was $4 for this little lamp. Now, all of this together was $30, which is not a price I would usually pay at a normal retail store, but small businesses get a pass, okay? They're different, they operate under different rules, and I am happy to make that exception. While I was there, I also visited some nearby thrift stores, and here is what I got. A little wooden box shaped like either an orange or a persimmon, I couldn't tell. This celestial themed throw blanket that was so my vibe I almost couldn't believe my eyes. And lastly, this Rings of Saturn t-shirt, which was funny because I walked into the store literally saying out loud, I'm not buying any more clothes. I have enough clothes. And then only a few seconds later, I pulled this out of the rack. It was only $1. I couldn't say no. And I didn't buy this, but I saw this McDonald's sweatshirt featuring some of the characters we came to know in my previous video. What a nice little coincidence. After all that excitement though, it was time to return to cutting wood. When I call myself an amateur miniature artist, this is why. Look at the sheer inelegance, the pieces falling apart, not to mention my big matey claws blocking the camera. Or maybe this is normal, I don't know. If you're a miniature artist, feel free to let me know. Anyway, eventually I got my wits back together and finished all the drawers. I put the drawer in to test the fit, and now I can't get it out. Oh, thank God. Thank you, little knife. These two drawers fit pretty well, but these two need some sanding. My least favorite activity. The plan was to do the sanding and the staining all in one session, but it was getting so cold outside that my fingers were turning red and my fingernails were actually starting to get purple, so I had to scurry back inside. Staining is gonna wait until tomorrow when it's a little warmer, and also I realized I forgot to add the feet on this thing. While this dries, let's talk about the contents. For the main compartment up here, I want to make some square clay bottles. Ignore how crappy the drawings are. I am an artist, I swear. I know that historically they would use glass bottles, but I'm basing it off of this German bottle. I don't know what it says on there, but I really love the aesthetics of it. I got it for $1 at the thrift store, even though I can't read what's on the label. But basically, that's the vibe we're going for, and we're just going to use air dry clay to make square little bottles and print out some little labels out of craft paper. And for the cork, I don't have any small corks, but here's what I do have. So at one of the thrift stores I go to, they have this platter of orphaned earrings that you can buy for $1, and I got 10 of them. I'll give you a close-up. Ignore this plane, this has nothing to do with this. Basically, I'm gonna use a few of these as the bottle stoppers, and I think it'll look really cool. Other than the bottles, we're also going to make a mortar and pestle. I think that's all we're going to make out of the clay. Other than that, I'm also going to put some cool rocks in there. It's a little bag of various gemstones here. A lump of pumice, I think. A few chunks of quartz. And this. Let me open it for you. Purple gemstone. Looks like glass. I don't think this is a real gemstone. Several chunks of this pyrite, otherwise known as fool's gold. And it seems like there's even more quartz and stuff in there. But populating the cabinet will have to wait, as there was a myriad of things we need to do beforehand. First, I had to figure out the hardware. What do we think? Is it too small or just right? Is this too extra for an apothecary kit? I think this is what I'll do. I'll do the bail handles on the little drawers inside, and on the outer one, I'll use one single crystal knob. And for the top, I'll use the regular handle, just like so. And then I had to stain it. While I was out and about on my little shopping spree, I also picked up a little jar of stain in weathered oak. Unfortunately, this stain isn't exactly the color I was looking for. I was expecting to be more like the picture on here, which is warm brown. In reality, it's more like a grayish undertone brown. More like a grage, I guess you'd say. Anyway, this is the stained and this is the not stained, and you can see a difference, which is good. But I still was hoping that it was gonna be warmer. But before I jumped to conclusions and immediately panicked and bought a new jar of stain, I decided to let it dry and see what it looked like after a second coat. And while it was drying, I got to work on those clay jars. Previously, I said I wanted to make square jars, but in the end, I thought it'd be cuter to have rounded jars, like my reference bottle. I simply fashioned a stout little cylinder, attached a disc of clay on top, and added an earring as the stopper. And then I set about making the tiny mortar and pestle. This was how they looked after they dried, and they just look so... I know edible isn't the right word, but they look like perfect little marshmallows. I want to eat them. Anyway, and then it was time to paint. I mixed up an ochre color similar to my German bottle and got to painting. Ideally, I would have liked to remove the earrings so I didn't get any paint on them, but they were quite stuck in there and I didn't want to break my beautiful jars. All the little pots are painted, and now I have to color the mortar and pestle, and I've got this stone thing as reference. First, I just had to paint everything black, and then I slapped some gray paint on there all willy-nilly. I also added some lighter gray for some variety, and after the paint dried, I also applied a nice thick coat of glossy top coat, which would make it look more like stone. Back to the stain. Unfortunately, when I began my second coat, I realized no amount of layering was going to make the stain any less gray. And so... look at this color difference. Oh, I'm so glad I bit the bullet and bought a new can. This would look even more gorgeous once I put on the poly, but first I gotta let this dry for a few hours. And while waiting for all of that to dry, I began work on the bottle labels. Previously, I said I wanted to print the labels, but I thought it'd be cozier and more rustic to hand draw them instead. So I whipped out my super old but super treasured Prismacolors and started drawing. The first attempt I used a thin micron, but that made the image look too crisp and polished, so on subsequent labels I just used the pencil crayons. It is the next morning. I let all of these pieces dry overnight, and for some reason, this drawer doesn't really fit anymore. Same with this little one. It fits, but it's not smooth anymore. And I wonder if either the cold caused the body to shrink, or if the stain caused the drawer to swell. Either way, we're gonna have to make it fit somehow, so more sanding it is. Everything that needs to be sanded has now been sanded, and while I put more stain on those pieces, the other pieces are going to get a nice thin coat of poly. The recommended drying time is 3 to 4 hours, but because it's so wet and creepy outside, I'm going to give it 5 to 6 hours. While we wait for all of that to dry, let's make some of this stuff look old and decrepit. I began with the scale. This was the last one on the shelf in the miniature store, and I knew it wasn't going to be easy to physically find this anywhere else, certainly not at Michael's. So I bought it. I started with a dark rusty brown paint, putting this in the deeper crevices where dirt and gunk might have caked in. Golden shiny, old and decrepit. After that, I used a lighter ochre color to add some spots of rust. And to make it look extra grimy and gross, affectionate, I mixed up a light green for copper corrosion. This is what I want. Green corrosion. I'm not going to lie, this was super fun. I'm not that good at miniature painting, but this doesn't require much skill or precision. Just glob the paint on there and dab at it with your fingers until it looks good. This was the end result, and I love how messed up and rusty it looks. Tetanus core, one might even say. And then it was time to give the same treatment to the handles. And then I just began filling up the little jars with various things. I filled 2 with the little gemstones from my rock collection, and 1 with some tiny dried flowers I found on the side of the road. I also remembered that I had this fancy glass decanter that I bought months ago when I only had the vaguest notions of making a little apothecary cabinet, and I decided to top it with an earring as well. With that, every bit and bob was ready to be put in the cabinet. Unfortunately, only 1 hour had passed at this point, and let me tell you, the worst part of crafting isn't ironing or even sanding, it's waiting. Waiting for the stain to dry, waiting for the poly to set, and after all of that, I also have to wait for the glue to dry when I attach all the hardware. Since I had hours to spare though, I decided to make this cat newspaper. Look at this, the sun finally came out. Well, after that speech about how much I hate waiting, here is a direct casualty of it. I couldn't fathom the idea of waiting another 3 to 4 hours for a second coat of stain, so most of the pieces didn't get a second coat. But you can see here that the ones that did, such as the upper drawer here, had a much more even and warmer coat. Hard to tell on camera, but it was clear in person. But since it was too late to fix this, I filed this away as knowledge for the future, and lightly sanded the polyed pieces to prep them for a second coat. Round 2 of poly is done. I will have to come back in a few hours to poly the inside of these side cabinets. Alright, more waiting. It is 9 PM, 6 hours later, and I finished applying the final coat of poly. And all of tomorrow I'm going to let these dry because the can does recommend 24 hours before light use. So I'll see you guys in 2 days. The poly has been sanded and buffed, and now it's time to finally add all the hardware. Now, of course, beyond the handles themselves, I also have to add hinges for the side panels as well as a little clasp to keep them closed in the middle, right here. Some may remember this failure of a box restoration. And yes, we are finally going to use its salvaged hardware. But since I need 2 sets of hinges, I also got this box for 50 cents. The clasp on this box is also much more ornate than the other one. I removed the red paint on the hardware with a bit of acetone, which made the Q-tip look pretty gruesome. Speaking of gruesome, have you seen what my cat did to me? Literally so rude. Since the base wood was too thin for the screws, I stored them away for future projects. Before I began gluing, I taped the doors in place just so nothing shifted around as I was working. You might be able to see how crooked and unaligned the pieces are. I didn't mind it that much because that's just the charm, or the curse, whichever you prefer, of handmade stuff. To make sure the clasps were aligned, I taped them together as well. The backs were hollow, so to ensure the glue would have a good grip, I fitted a tiny piece of wood into the back. And then I glued that contraption As I was saying, I glued that contraption onto the doors and hoped for the best. And now, with everything done, it is finally time for the final reveal.